Can we see me? Can we hear me? I'm a little bit doubting maybe the seeing part. I was getting some buffering, and we all know I'm paranoid anyway. So real quick check, as per usual. Muted? Let me see. It shouldn't be. Ah, okay. You just had your volume down. Pardon me. No, that was so funny. I was like, wait, but another person said they could hear. Like my brain really, it was a four-way collision. It like absolutely, it froze for a second. I was like, how is that? What? Okay, well, since you can see me and hear me and all of that lovely stuff, I'm Brittany. This is Hualian. And welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today, we are finishing Volume 2 of Heaven Official's Blessing. We don't have too much of an extraordinary hurdle to climb. There's like, we usually get through about 40 pages per stream, and there's like 43 left or something like that. Not a big deal. I actually haven't said this in a couple of streams, so just in case, well, I mean, obviously I don't know what's going, I have not read this book. This is not a kind of like, sit down, let me prepare to read you a thing, like, that's not how, I have no idea. I have no idea what happens. The second season of the Donghua isn't out yet, and I'm impatient. So, we're reading ahead. We're reading ahead of the Donghua. Volume 1, I had seen the Donghua. This, I got no clue. So, this is very much a reading reaction, book reaction thing. I have a cough left over from childhood asthma. It's annoying, but we try to deal with it. So, we were on page, I thought, for whatever reason, I remembered we were on like a really clear stopping point. We were not. We were on page either 346 or 347. I believe we were in the middle of 347. If somebody has the specific place written down, verify for me real quick. I believe we had finished with the take Chirong away and don't let him cause any more havoc outside. That's what I had. I was almost there. I was so close. We are at the soldiers guarding the palace gates. Thank you. Thank you. I literally have pen and paper to my left. I could be writing this down at the end of every stream. Ask my ADD if that happens. I'm always excited for the streams where we finish a volume, because so far, this team has done a very good job, not just in general with translations. I mean, I'm sure there are like errors here and there and nothing's perfect, but they're doing a very, very good job with the translation. And they also have broken up the volumes in just brilliantly infuriating places. They really know how to separate this huge ass story up into bits. And I also count the Modao Zuche, which is done by the same people. The Modao Zuche books as well are all just divided up right in the most wonderfully painful spots. So I'm super curious to see where we're going to be left for a month, because I don't do volume 3 until, what are we coming up on? I don't do volume 3 until April. March, we take a little bit of a break. I'm actually playing a video game for March live streams. I don't know which one yet. I'm going to be tossing a few at the Patreon, and then they get to vote on it. But it will be some kind of queer-ass, gay-ass video game in one way or another. So that's what we're doing for March. So wherever we leave off today is where we leave off until the beginning of April. I have no idea what that means, but some of you do, so I imagine you're screaming something appropriate at the screen right now. So, wasting no more time, let us jump in. The soldiers guarding the palace gates thought it was strange to see the crown prince racing back, having left such a short while ago, but of course they didn't dare obstruct him. Thus, Shi Lian ran straight for the Imperial Medical Office and made Feng Xin and Mu Qing wait outside the door, with Qirong under arrest while he entered the infirmary alone. The Crown Prince rarely returned to the palace and rarely gave orders, so the Imperial doctors naturally rushed over with due haste. Shi Lian placed... Shi Lian placed the young child in a chair and said, "Thanks in advance, everyone. This child was beaten by several adults, stuffed in a sack, and dragged through the streets. Please check if there are any head injuries first. That's the most important thing." Neither royal nor noble had ever brought in a wild, dirty babe for them to heal before, but the Imperial medical team also knew they needed to do whatever they were told to, and they acknowledged Shi Lian's direction with the chorus of, "Yes, yes, yes." One of them said, "Put your hands down first, little one." Although the child had been docile in Shi Lian's arms up until now, he started struggling then and firmly covered the right side of his face, refusing to drop his hands. No matter how competent the Imperial doctors were, if the patient would not cooperate, there was nothing they could do. The doctors looked to Shi Lian. "Your Highness, how..." Shi Lian raised a hand. "He's probably afraid of strangers. It's fine. Let me." The child was sitting in a chair, and Shi Lian couldn't be level with his eyes, so he bent forward and tilted his head. "What's your name?" The child's large eye stared at him intently, his obsidian-black pupil reflecting a snow-white silhouette. This gaze, if it must be described, was exactly as Feng Xin had said, possessed by the devil. It shouldn't be the gaze of a child. It was a while before the child bowed his head. Hong. His voice was tiny and soft, a little mumbled. It wasn't like he didn't want to tell, or that he was slightly embarrassed. It was like he didn't want to tell her that he was slightly embarrassed. Shi Lian only sort of heard the word Hong, the color red. Of course. Then asked another question. Hang on. I just had a realization. And not like, obviously, who the we all know who the child... No, I just realized that they did it again. Or rather, she did it again. From Volume 1 to Volume 2. Volume 1 was about, you know, Sunglan actually being Huachang. So it was like, you know, do you know who Sunglan really is? Does Shi Lian know who Sunglan really is? And then Volume 2, apparently, was about who Huachang really is. That just landed at me right now. The MXTX hating starting off early, real early in this stream. How old are you? 10, the child replied. Shi Lian was only asking offhand, hoping to lower his guard, but hearing the child's shy response of 10, he was taken aback. I thought he was only 7 or 8, but he's 10? This child is extremely malnourished and emaciated. After a pause, Shi Lian smiled softly. The doctors will see to your wounds now. Don't be afraid and lower your hands, okay? That child heard, but hesitantly shook his head. Why not? Shi Lian asked. He was silent for a long time before replying, ugly. Obviously, seriously speaking, that is unbelievably, that's heartbreaking. That a child at 10 is that's heartbreaking. However, my monkey brain can only think of, yeah, don't worry, babe. Just give it a few years. You'll be fine. Because I'm a bad person. But anyway, his response was just that one word, and no matter how Shi Lian coaxed, he refused to remove his hands. Shi Lian promised that he wouldn't think him ugly, that he wouldn't look, but not even turning around would do the trick. What obstinance at such a young age. Without much choice, the Imperial doctors could only ask him a few questions, have him recognize a number of fingers, make sure he didn't feel faint or have any headaches, check that he was perfectly conscious of what he saw and what he thought, and attend to his physical wounds. As the Imperial doctors worked, they all appeared confused, clicking their tongues in awe. Hualian stood guard on the side, and hearing their sounds of wonder, he asked, "How is he, everyone?" One of the Imperial doctors asked, in spite of himself, "Your Highness, did this child really get beaten and dragged along the roads in a sack?" Hualian was speechless for a second. "Why would that be false?" The Imperial doctor replied, "If that really is the case, then amazing. I have never seen anyone so tenacious. He has 5 broken ribs and a broken leg, and many other injuries, big and small. But despite all of that, he's remained conscious this entire time and can even hold a conversation while sitting upright. Even adults would find that difficult. Never mind a 10-year-old child." That makes me think he's used to surviving violence like that, and now I want to blow up the planet. Hearing how severe the injuries were, Hualian inwardly became even more furious at Chirong. He looked at that child and saw that he was sitting there on his chair as if he felt no pain, stealing glimpses at Hualian with that large obsidian black left eye. When he noticed he'd been caught staring by Hualian, he immediately turned his head away. Seeing this, for some reason Hualian thought the boy was both silly and pitiful. He asked, "Will his injuries heal?" One of the Imperial doctors wrapped new layers of bandages around the child's head and replied, "Not a problem." Only then did Hualian relax. He nodded, "Thank you for all your hard work." Just then, an attendant entered to notify them of the imminent arrival of His Majesty the King and the Queen. Each of the Imperial doctors immediately stood up and exited the Imperial Medical Office to greet them. Hualian moved the child to the bed and said, "Lie down and get some rest." It occurred to him that the child was afraid of strangers, and all the people who would be crowding in shortly might scare him. So Hualian lowered the bedside curtains before rising to his feet too. A number of guards and attendants escorted the king and the queen as they walked into the hall. The queen's face was pale. "My dear child, why did you return so suddenly when you just left the palace? Were you hurt outside?" "Please be at ease, mother," Hualian said. "I wasn't hurt. It was someone else who was injured." Just then, Chirong cried out from the corner, "Yimu, save me!" "Ain't nobody saving you, bitch." Only then did the queen notice Chirong to the side, firmly held by Feng Xin and under arrest, and she was shocked. She was focused on the well-being of her son and had completely ignored everything else, but now that she saw, she asked, "Wrong heir, what happened?" The king, on the other hand, knitted his brows slightly. "Feng Xin, why are you holding Prince Xiaojing like a criminal?" When His Majesty arrived, Feng Xin should have Xiaojing, am I supposed to? When His Majesty arrived, Feng Xin should have bowed in greeting like Mu Qing and all the others, but because he had Chirong in his hand and couldn't release him, he was put in an awkward situation. Hualian spoke up, "It was under my command." Chirong held up his right arm. "Yimu, my arm is broken. I don't want to fucking hear it, you little shit." This stream's gonna get demonetized. The queen hadn't had the chance to sympathize before Hualian cut in harshly. "You broke an arm, but what about that child?" "What child?" the king asked. "A 10-year-old child," Hualian answered. "Powerless, vulnerable, and frail in stature. Chirong sent his subordinates to beat him. If not for the child's tenacity, he would have been beaten to death on the spot." Chirong looked as if he had just heard a joke, his eyes widening. "A powerless, vulnerable 10-year-old child? Frail? Cousin, you don't know just how vicious, how savage, how spunky that little non-croaker was. He only pretends to be pathetic in front of you. I called for 5 or 6 guys and they still couldn't catch the brat. He thrashed and bit them until they were bloodied all over. If he hadn't angered me so, why else would I have dragged him behind my horse carriage?" Hearing this, both the king and queen's faces fell. Hualian drew in a deep breath and shouted, "Enough! Do you think Do you think what you've done is impressive? I think what he's done is psychotic, and he should probably be monitored and restrained." Chi-Rong wasn't one to shy away from the limelight. He was so arrogant and ostentatious that there was no way the citizens of the capital hadn't seen him. And after they saw, there was no reason he wouldn't become the talk of every dinner table conversation in the city. The king gave the queen a look, appearing a little grim. Take Prince Xiaojing away. Doctor, see to his arm. The golden carriage will be permanently confiscated. You will be confined to your palace and reflect on your actions for a month without release. Oh, sure. No, right. Yeah, that's adequate. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Yeah. I'm sorry. The cough actually tends to get better and go away the longer we get into the stream. The guard behind him immediately acknowledged the order and moved forward to take Chi-Rong. Only then did Feng Xin let go. Chi-Rong, however, no longer cared and humphed. Take it, take it. I already knew today would be my last chance to drive it. The queen sighed sadly, hearing that he had no remorse or repenting heart. Shi Lian spoke up. It would seem that with only a month of detention to reflect, he will still do this again. There needs to be stricter discipline. Thank you! Chi-Rong was taken aback and stammered angrily. Cousin Crown Prince, you... But then he switched gears. Fine. I admit it. This time it was my fault. No matter how His Majesty punishes me, Chi-Rong has no complaints. His next words changed the argument's direction. But shouldn't Cousin Crown Prince's servant also be punished? Yimu, my arm was broken by that Feng Xin, you know. Hearing this, the king instantly shifted his gaze to Feng Xin, looking outraged. Feng Xin bowed his head, and Mu Qing imperceptibly shuffled 2 steps away. The king berated him coldly. Feng Xin, you are the Crown Prince's bodyguard. The Crown Prince treats you well and regards you highly, but have you forgotten your place? What is this arrogance? Your duty is to serve His Highness. Is this how you serve him? You dare raise a hand against the Crown Prince's cousin, Prince Xiaojing? At those words, Feng Xin was ready to kneel, but Shi Lian stopped him. No need to kneel. Feng Xin obeyed Shi Lian's commands first and foremost. Even under the king's orders, his priority was His Highness, and so he instantly straightened again. Seeing this, the king grew even more displeased. It's true that Feng Xin broke Chi-Rong's arm, but the reason was to protect his master, Shi Lian said. Besides, Chi-Rong was at fault first, not Feng Xin, so why must he kneel? It doesn't matter, the king said. Either way, he has offended Prince Xiaojing. There's a difference between masters and servants, a distinction of superior versus inferior. If I, the king, were to make him kneel, or even if I punished him with 100 lashes, there would be nothing inappropriate about it. Although the king wasn't as affectionate towards Chi-Rong as the queen was, Chi-Rong was still nevertheless a part of the royal household. He was never to be disobeyed or offended. Chi-Rong knew this very well, and said with a sidelong glance, no need for a flogging punishment. He belongs to Cousin Crown Prince. I don't want to make things difficult. As long as he breaks his own arm and kowtows before me 3 times, I can let this go. I knew it was gonna be something. You knew it was going to be something. The king nodded slowly to accept the decision. However, Shi Lian interjected, if you must punish Feng Xin, then you must punish me first. He's my servant. First of all, he's done nothing wrong, and second of all, if he was at fault, it was still done under my orders. I will take punishment on his behalf. Oh, there's art. Hearing him, rage flashed across the king's face. By and large, all fathers and sons in the world must go through this change. When the son is young, he idolizes his father as the greatest hero on earth, his own personal role model, and his worship is clear. However, when the son matures to a certain age, he starts to question everything his father does. This can even brew revulsion, until, in the end, neither side will acknowledge the other. Shi Lian's fundamental objective for entering Mount Taisang was to improve his martial arts and search for the direction of his heart. However, he was never attached to a particular place where he trained, nor his identity. The so-called Tao of cultivation meant exactly what it said, to walk the path. As long as one's heart was set on the path with a singular mind, then training could be done anywhere. He didn't need to follow any dictated norms, nor enter the royal holy temple. But there was another reason why Shi Lian had begged and pestered them to let him train on Mount Taisang, and that was because he really didn't get along with his father. As the esteemed crown prince of Xianlei, the moment Shi Lian was born, the king of Xianlei had already drawn out every detail of the path of his life, neat and orderly. It was all right when he was still young. A child had few worries, and Shi Lian only needed his parents to build gold foil palaces with him, to frolic and play. As the years went by, Shi Lian saw more and more that his father wasn't only a father, but also the ruler of a kingdom, and many of their beliefs and actions no longer agreed. For example, the so-called royal authority was one of the things Shi Lian loathed. If they couldn't agree, then it was best to stay far away. Every time he returned to the palace, he spent time conversing merrily with his mother, but he never had any heart-to-hearts with his father. Oh, sorry. Almost damn near forgot the art again. Look at it. All the art is always so beautiful. Like, check the robes. Oh, and the stuff in his mom's hair? So good. Neither of the two ever... Woo, hang on. No, that is way too much of my face. I cannot... Ooh, no. No. There we go. That's better. Neither of the two ever took the initiative to talk to each other, and it was the queen who always mediated between them. Father and son had maintained this stalemate for many months, and now, with Shi Lian stubbornly refusing to back down, the king said, "Very well. Take his place if you must. Let's see if you can actually withstand it." "Of course I can," Shi Lian retorted. The queen saw the two of them butting heads again and anxiously intervened. "Why must it be like this?" Just then, Feng Shen, who hadn't spoken a word, suddenly raised his left arm and struck down on his right. There was a loud crack. The crowd was startled and looked toward the sound and saw that his right arm was drooping limply, exactly like Qirong's. Shi Lian was both shocked and furious. "Man, I don't know why you shocked. Feng Shen's not going to let you take the punishment for him. Are you insane? Not going to happen." "Feng Shen!" Cold sweat rolled down Feng Shen's forehead, and without a word, he knelt down before Qirong and I think that would be pronounced Ko. Kowtowed 3 times before Shi Lian could stop him. Quite pleased, Qirong laughed out loud. "All right, I guess I'll forgive you. Why couldn't you have done this earlier?" Even though Qirong's arm was also broken, he looked energized and refreshed when he left, as if he had just won a battle. As for Feng Shen, he was still kneeling on the ground. Mu Qing stood on the sidelines watching, looking vaguely ashen, but his thoughts were otherwise unreadable. Shi Lian whipped around to face his father, yelling angrily, "You!" Feng Shen grabbed him with his left arm. "Your Highness!" The queen also put her hands on him to pull him back. Feng Shen had followed Shi Lian since the age of 14, and Shi Lian knew he was given preferential treatment by the queen. Feng Shen had only done this because he couldn't bear to see the queen sad over the dispute between father and son. Aw, shit. If Shi Lian threw a fit now, then Feng Shen's efforts would go to waste. He swallowed his outrage, but the fire continued to burn inside his heart. The king finally looked appeased and left with a grim expression. The queen had always liked Feng Shen. She sighed. "My child, we've wronged you." "Please don't say that, Your Majesty. This was my duty," Feng Shen replied. Hearing this, Mu Qing's eyes flickered, and he seemed to sneer soundlessly. Shi Lian, however, closed his eyes. "Mother, if you really can't handle Qirong, lock him up. Please?" The queen sighed, nodded, then shook her head and left as well. Shi Lian asked for one of the imperial doctors to tend to Feng Shen's right arm, and he apologized. "Feng Shen, I'm sorry." Once the others had gone, Feng Shen immediately changed face and clicked his tongue. "This is nothing. I dared to hit him, so why would I be scared of his revenge?" After a pause, he advised, "Your Highness, of course it's right for you to discipline Qirong, but don't be angry with His Majesty. His Majesty is the king and a figurehead of the older generation, so he thinks differently than we do. Seeing the two of you fight makes the queen unhappy. She has her troubles too. And how could Shilian not know his mother had her own troubles? Chirong's mother was the younger blood sister of the queen, and they shared deep sisterly affections. When this sister was young and immature, at the first bloom of romance, she thirsted for freedom and broke off a good engagement to elope with a bodyguard from her palace, lured by his sweet honeyed words. Who knew that the one she had chosen was a villain? This daughter of nobility was stuffed into a shack barely better than a doghouse, and not half a year later, the villain revealed his true nature and his taste for debauchery. Once Chirong was born, he became even more abusive, beating and kicking his wife and child. Finally, the mother couldn't endure it any longer, and when Chirong turned 5, she dejectedly took him and ran away from home. Because she had long since been disgraced through that royal scandal, she closed the door and no longer stepped foot outside, spending the rest of her life in grim depression, only showing particular love and devotion to her only son. That explains a lot. During an upheaval, Chirong's mother lost her life saving the queen. Before she passed, she asked Shilian's mother to look after Chirong. Of course, the queen did her utmost. However, it was still awkward raising someone else's son. Discipline was difficult, too strict, and it would appear to be abuse, and considering familial affections, she could hardly be so harsh. But too lax, and it would lead to the kind of behavior seen today, and without restraints, it would only worsen in the future. The queen often wondered, she raised Shilian and Chirong almost the same, so why were their characters so different? Well, I mean, one of them was viciously abused until they were 5 years old. Just then, Shilian suddenly remembered that there was a small child still lying on the bed here in the medical office. He raised the bedside curtain to check, and that child had been sitting up since who knows when, looking like he'd been trying to peer out of a crack in the curtains. Oh, he heard everything. Yeah, duh, of course he did. Which means he only heard Shilian continue to be the best person. When Shilian raised the curtain, he lay down again obediently. Shilian said, "Did we scare you with that quarrel just now? Don't let it bother you. It has nothing to do with you." "Your Highness, this child's wounds have been tended to. Now he needs quiet rest," one of the imperial doctors said. Shilian dipped his head slightly. "Thank you." He then bent down again to ask, "Where do you live? I'll take you home." That child shook his head. "No home." Fengshen approached, holding the arm that was now in a sling. "No home? So he really is a little beggar?" Seeing that this child was so emaciated and small, his clothes filthy and unkempt, it wasn't impossible to believe. If he had no home to return to, they couldn't possibly leave him at the palace or throw him out on the streets. Shilian pondered for a moment, then said, "If that's the case, then let's bring him with us back to Mount Taisang." Unexpectedly, Moonqing suddenly spoke up. "He's lying." That's the end of the chapter. Also, it just occurred to me that that chapter was called Lost Red Pearl, so that's offensive. We're on chapter 27, which is called, okay, all right, this is my favorite chapter title so far. To ascend is human, to fall is also human. Best chapter title. This is objective. This is not this is not an opinion. This is fact. The best chapter title. Chapter 27, page 361. Shilian turned his head and asked, "What do you mean?" "The homeless street urchins of the imperial capital all run together in a gang, and they come to my neighborhood frequently to beg for food. I know all of them, but I've never seen this child before." That young child peered at Muqing and didn't say a word. Fengshen was doubtful. "Who do they beg for food from? You? And you'd give it to them?" Mu Qing glared at him. If they pester relentlessly, there's no other way. Feng Xin still thought the notion rather unbelievable, but didn't make any further commentary. Oh. Watching their exchange, Shi Lian wanted to laugh. Besides, there are sewn patches on his clothes, Mu Qing added. Judging by the needlework, it must have been done by a grown-up sometime recently, so there's at least someone of age in his household. His family situation might not be the best, but he's definitely not a beggar. I don't know what kind of family situation would make a 10-year-old just lie and say they're homeless. You wonder? Shi Lian naturally would not notice the details of needlework on sewn patches, nor whether it was done by adults. But Mu Qing used to be an errand boy at the Royal Holy Temple, and he also did all kinds of chores at home. When Shi Lian looked closely, it was indeed as he had said. So he asked, "Do you have grown-ups at home?" The young child shook his head, but Mu Qing said, "There must be. If he doesn't go back, his family will surely be worried sick looking for him." "No, no way, there's nobody!" that young child cried, sounding like he was afraid to be sent back, and he opened his arms, reaching for Shi Lian. He was still covered with mud and blood, and Feng Xin couldn't stand it anymore. "What are you doing, kid? Things were urgent earlier, so whatever, but shouldn't you know better by now? This is the Crown Prince. His Highness, the Crown Prince. Do you understand?" That young child's arms immediately shrank back, but he was still gazing at Shi Lian. "My parents were quarreling and kicked me out. I walked for a long time, but had nowhere to go." The other three looked at each other in dismay. After a moment, Feng Xin said, "So what now?" One of the imperial doctors suggested, "If His Highness is troubled, he can be kept here in the palace and have a few attendants assigned to take care of him." Shi Lian contemplated, but after some thought, he shook his head slowly. At the end of the day, he was afraid Qirong wouldn't give up, and he'd sneak out to cause trouble. "The way I see it, it'd still be best if I watch over him until his wounds are healed. It seems his family won't be able to look after him, unfortunately. Feng Shen, when you take care of the stalls that were toppled by Qirong, send some men to see if his parents can be found, and let them know so they don't worry." "All right," Feng Shen nodded. I mean, I don't know. They, kicked him out. We don't know. I don't know. One of his arms was still in a sling, but he extended the good arm to reach for the young child, intending to pick him up by the collar. Shi Lian laughed. "You're wounded, don't worry about it." However, Feng Shen shrugged it off. "Only one arm is broken, the other's still fine. If both my arms were broken, I could still use my teeth to carry him by the collar and bring him up the mountain for you." "Damn." Mu Qing rolled his eyes from behind him and then spoke up. "Don't bother, let me carry him." But just as he took one step forward, the child jumped off the bed himself and said, "I can walk on my own." That expression, set with resistance, spoke louder than words, and it made Mu Qing's second step extremely awkward, as he was unsure whether or not to proceed. That little kid had 5 broken ribs and a broken leg, but he was still bursting with energy. Shi Lian really didn't know whether to laugh or ache for him. Ooh, we love a variant of laugh or cry. He settled on saying, "Stop running around." Then he bent down and picked him up. The 3 of them left the palace with the child in tow. Since Qirong had caused havoc on the streets earlier, disturbing the townspeople and toppling a number of stalls, Shi Lian felt deeply guilty, and that he had no face to meet any of the citizens. So the group slunk around, afraid to show themselves, using only the back alleyways. The entire way, that small child was extremely docile in Shi Lian's arms. They told him to be quiet, and he uttered not a single sound. Feng Xin glared. "This brat kicked me yesterday, but look at him now. He really knows how to pick 'em." "It's His Highness the Crown Prince. Of course he's liked more than most people," Mu Qing said. For some reason, even when he said something well-meaning, he'd still choose words that made people feel wholly uncomfortable. Feng Xin didn't want to acknowledge him anymore. After walking for a while, Feng Xin spoke up. "No, I still don't think your highness should... I still don't think your highness should hold a strange child for everyone to see. What's the problem? Shi Lian asked. You're the crown prince, Feng Shen exclaimed. While he spoke, he saw a worn down a handcart farther up the alley and said, Put the kid in that cart and pull it. Mu Qing immediately voiced, Just so we're clear, I will not pull that thing up the mountain. No one's asking you to, Feng Shen said. He reached out and yanked the child from Shi Lian's arms, and the child started struggling again. Never mind, forget it. Maybe somebody else needs the cart, Shi Lian said. Just then, from somewhere nearby, someone suddenly called out, Are you the Crown Prince? Another immediately shouted, Yes, that's the Crown Prince. His mask fell yesterday, and I saw his face with my own eyes. That's him. Catch him. The three of them froze. Their hearts stopped. Although Shi Lian didn't think he did anything wrong at the heavenly ceremonial procession the day before, he also knew that others might not agree. To cut short the god-pleasing martial ceremony was an ominous sign of misfortune. It was taboo amongst the nobility, and when all the excitement wore off after the fact, and the people started to wonder what it all meant, they probably wouldn't be as forgiving either. Added on top of that was the havoc on the streets caused by Qirong earlier in the day. The complaints must be endless. If they were surrounded now, it might end badly. Before Shi Lian could dwell on it, Mu Qing grabbed him and shouted, Your Highness, run! Feng Shen was pulling the cart and urged him to. Your Highness, I have a broken arm. I won't be able to stop anyone rioting. Go! However, outside the alleyway, there was already a mass of people who were pouring in, their faces filled with excitement, blocking all viable exits. The four of them had nowhere to run, and they watched as they were surrounded by countless pairs of wide eyes. Shi Lian braced himself and thought, If anything, I'll just let them beat us down without fighting back. But unexpectedly, although the crowd poured in, it didn't pulverize them. Instead, a number of hands reached out and threw him into the air with cheers of, Your Highness! Shi Lian was thrown into the air multiple times, but still maintained his calm and composure. The people shouted, all talking at once. Your Highness, that leap on the Grand Avenue of Divine Might yesterday was spectacular! Someone praised in awe. That was such an amazing jump! Really, I totally thought the Heavenly Emperor himself had descended. I had goosebumps! Another validated him. His Highness was right to save that child. A life is a life. Do they think kids from our poor families are so different? If it were me, I'd do the same. Another raged. That's right. Today there was talk of how His Highness had ruined the event, and I just couldn't stand it. If it had been a royal or a noble who had fallen, they wouldn't be saying those things. Your Highness, don't mind those people. His Highness is the only one who truly cares about us. Shi Lian went from feeling guilty at the beginning to disoriented halfway through, until finally he was affected by the enthusiastic, cheerful faces all around. The crowd clustered around Shi Lian, and when they emerged onto the main street, more and more joined them. Feng Shen, Mu Qing, and that young child were pushed away and separated, left a long way back without any way to get through, and they could only follow along behind the parade. This large assembly of people was surprisingly no smaller than the crowd from the day before. Every time Shi Lian made a move to leave, he was forcibly dragged back in and thrown in the air without any chance of being let down. Shi Lian couldn't help but find it both funny and reassuring, and he thought to himself, the people in the state preceptor have completely opposite sentiments. It looks like I was in the right. The heart eyes that I have for this boy. There's a scene break, by the way. When they reached Mount Taisang, the setting sun was ablaze, burning strong, as always. Once they passed through the large entrance gates, they saw trainees and cultivators all along the long, winding stone path, carrying water buckets and firewood and running up and down the road. They greeted Shi Lian and company as they went, but many watched the four plus a cart with wonder. Feng Shen was pulling that handcart with one hand like a perfectly diligent young black bull. Shi Lian and Mu Qing laughed with as much restraint as they could muster at first, but since they couldn't change his mind, they stopped caring. The maple grove was vast, and the wheels turned steadily. As they hiked, Shi Lian helped push the handcart from behind. He was in a good mood and casually asked the child another question. Little guy, what's your name really? Hong what? The child gazed at him attentively and answered in a small voice, I don't have a name. Shi Lian was taken back. Your mother didn't give you a name? That young child shook his head. My mother is gone. Sympathy sprouted in Shi Lian. Then what did your mother used to call you? The child hesitated for a moment, and then he replied, oh, no, sorry. That was one of those words that looked way more complicated for a second than it actually is. Hong Hong Air. So he was right when he said Hong. Although that name has a footnote. That name means my son Reddy, or just Little Red. And the award for most devastating footnote goes to his whole motif, his whole everything. I'm fine. It's fine. I totally, in my stunningness, I totally turned that page like half a page too early. I hate her. Shi Lian smiled. That's a rather cute nickname. I'll call you that from now on. Hong Hong Er seemed shy whenever they talked, and he kept his head bowed low. Dusk was approaching, and lights were ignited in the palace temples on each of the mountain peaks in the far distance. Among them, the brightest was, of course, the highest peak, the Divine Might Summit. Atop the Divine Might Summit, within the Palace of Divine Might, it was as bright as day, and the lights gathered like stars on the peak. Shi Lian sighed as he watched. The sigh wasn't born of sadness, but from scenery that emanated such beauty and magnificence. Every bit of light within the hall was an offered, everlasting lamp. Each lamp contained a devotee's most sincere prayers. The more everlasting lamps there were within the temple of a god, the more powerful that god. The chance to offer a lamp within the Palace of Divine Might of the Royal Holy Temple was difficult to buy even with 1,000 gold. Wealth, power, ability, passion, affinity, at least one of those 5 conditions must be fulfilled to enter the temple to offer light. Yet there were so many in the world who had none of those 5. Ow! The 4 of them stopped, gazing spellbound upon the Palace of Divine Might that shone like the sun, their expressions dissimilar. Just then, a somewhat familiar voice called out to them, Your Highness! Shi Lian looked back and saw a fair-faced young man hurrying toward him. It looked like the trainee who guarded the entrance of Xixiang Palace, and Shi Lian composed himself. Juji Shang? What's the hurry? Juji Shang noticed Mu Qing standing behind him and felt awkward, so he spoke, pretending not to have seen him. State Preceptor has been asking after you for a while. He's at the Palace of Divine Might right now, waiting for you. Shi Lian was taken aback hearing this, but he figured it had to be about the incident during the heavenly ceremonial procession the day before. Very well. Thank you, Xixiang. Shi Lian and Feng Xin and Mu Qing take Hong Hong Er back to the Palace of Shanlei. Then he Then he headed toward the Divine Might Summit. That was a typo. It wasn't supposed to be take, it was supposed to be took. Did something to my brain. Outside the Great Hall, clouds born from the incense vessel floated and wrapped around the Palace of Divine Might, giving it a dreamlike look. On either side of the vessel, there were long rows of bright everlasting lamps hung in the air in neat lines that made a wall of lanterns. Oh, weakness! Every everlasting lamp had the name and prayer of the light offerer inscribed in proper and dignified clerical script. Once inside the hall, there were rows upon rows of even more everlasting lamps hung on each wall. The lamps offered within the Palace of Divine Might were, of course, even more valuable than the ones outside. Inside the massive temple, at the very front, the chief state preceptor was offering incense before the statue of the Heavenly Emperor, and the 3 deputy state preceptors were behind him, uniformly prostrating before the divine statue. Shi Lian nodded when he entered. State preceptor? The state preceptors finished paying their respects before they turned to him and motioned for him to come forward. Thus Shi Lian approached, took an incense stick, and also paid his respects with sincerity. It was a moment before the state preceptor finally spoke. Your Highness, the 4 of us have deliberated. In regards to the heavenly ceremonial procession, there are but 2 ways to resolve the problem. Please do tell, State Preceptor, Hualian said. The first method, the State Preceptor said, is to find the child who disrupted the procession, and then we shall conduct a ceremony. At the very least, one of his 5 senses must be sealed as penance? What? Hualian's head shot up. No, he then repeated definitively. Absolutely not. The State Preceptor nodded. I expected this response from you, so we've put the weight of our consideration on the second method. Please do tell, Hualian said solemnly. The second method, the State Preceptor said, is to have your Highness publicly repent before the people of Xianlei, ask the heavens for forgiveness, then face the wall in reflection for a month. Not possible, Hualian said leisurely. The State Preceptor was taken aback. We're not really asking you to face the wall to reflect. You just have to look like you are. He suddenly remembered they were before the statue of the Heavenly Emperor and immediately corrected himself. As long as you are sincere, it will suffice. Still, Hualian responded, no. And the reason? The State Preceptor asked. State Preceptor, when I descended the mountain today, do you know what I saw? Hualian asked. Not only did the people of the imperial capital not condemn the accident that happened during the heavenly ceremonial procession, they very much approved of it. This proves that the people of this kingdom all believe that the decision to save that child was right. If I were to do as you say and be punished for something correct, what would they think? Won't it only tell everyone that if we save a life, not only do we not obtain fortuitous merits, but will instead be punished for our sin? How should they think or act after that? Whether it's right or wrong isn't important, the State Preceptor said. You must choose between the 2 paths. Nothing is perfect in this world. Either that child shoulders this blame, or you do. Wait. Title of the chapter. Is one of the reasons that he or a you know, I'm gonna save that thought. I'm just gonna save it. Right or wrong is very important, thank you. If I must choose, then I choose the 3rd path. Oh, write this down. Somebody write this down. Oh yeah. Oh, hang on. 370. Mid. Yeah. Uh-huh. I've rewatched Firefly recently, and if you haven't seen it, you absolutely should. But there's a quote in there, actually from the movie, where the main character, it's an ensemble cast, but the captain, so, you know, one of the main characters, says, I aim to misbehave. And that is exactly what this reminds me of. If I must choose, then I choose the 3rd path. Like, fuck you. Like, I'm okay. I'm alright. I love him a normal amount. The State Preceptor rubbed his forehead. Your Highness, excuse my bluntness, but why do you care what they think? Today they think one way, tomorrow they'll think another. There's no need for you to mind the small details. Trust me, people will carry on doing what they need to do and will not be touched by your actions, nor use you as an example. It's best if we focus on carefully serving the ones above. As opposed to the ones below. Okay. Hualian was silent for a moment, then spoke. State Preceptor, ever since I entered the Royal Holy Temple to become a disciple here, the more I train, the more I reflect. There's actually something I've always thought, but didn't dare to speak of. And what's that? The State Preceptor asked. Is it really right for us to worship and prostrate before the gods like this? The State Preceptor was speechless for a moment. If we don't worship the gods, then what are we to do? Go homeless? What, your highness thinks that the thousands and millions of devotees who come here to worship are wrong in their beliefs? Shi Lian shook his head and pondered for a moment. Then he said, their beliefs are not wrong. It's only that this disciple doesn't think it's right to prostrate oneself. He raised his head and pointed to the resplendent, scintillating great statue of the heavenly emperor. When humans ascend, they become gods. To humans, gods are elders, teachers, everlasting light, but they are not our masters. Therefore, we should be full of thankfulness and admiration, but never groveling worship. Just like the Shenghuan heavenly ceremonial procession, I believe the correct attitude is thankfulness and shared joy, not fear, not ingratiation, not intimidation, and certainly not putting oneself in a position of servitude. Like, $371. Once again, the middle. Volume 2. We don't have time to unpack all that. The state preceptor remained poised and silent, but the other 3 deputy state preceptors grew restless, turning their heads back. Shi Lian continued, an accident happened. It couldn't be helped. I am willing to offer 1,000 lamps to brighten long nights. Even if this is an act of self-destruction, I am not afraid. But I refuse to bow my head for something I did right. Face the wall in reflection? What have I done wrong? What has anyone done wrong? It's like how Qurong committed evil, but Feng Xin, who subdued the wrongdoer, had to be punished. Where's the logic in it? If the heavens have eyes, they will not condemn me for this. Oh, shit! Huacheng better step aside. I'm about to be the #1 person in this boy's fan club. Oh, there's art of him being perfect. The state preceptor cast his gaze elsewhere. Then, Your Highness, let me ask you, what if the heavens really do condemn you? Will you apologize then? If that should happen, then the heavens are wrong. I am right. I will stand against the heavens and defy them until the end. Like, on one hand, potentially dangerous mindset to get into. On the other hand, in this specific case, a badass, an icon, a fucking legend. End of story. Whew. Hearing this, the state preceptor's face changed slightly, and he chuckled. Your Highness, you're pretty brave to say such words. The other 3 deputy state preceptors watched him, wanting to speak, but hesitated. Just then, an alarm suddenly blared outside the hall, like the ringing of multiple bells at once. Okay, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and show you the art now. Look at it. Look at him. Look at him being glorious. Glorious. And right. At least in this context. Completely. Now none of the 4 state preceptors could remain in their seats any longer. Forgot to click away from my face. And they rushed out at the same time, dashing toward the back of the hall. Shi Lian followed close behind. They traveled the many buildings behind the Palace of Divine Might until they came before a black pagoda. The doors to that black pagoda were open, and countless wisps of dark smoke whooshed out. The state preceptor let out a despairing scream. Where's Juan? Where the hell did he go? How did this happen? A number of trainee watchguards rushed over, and the one leading was Zhu Shishang. Hey! State preceptor, I'm over here. I don't know what happened. The door was perfectly locked, but it suddenly opened on its own. The state preceptor pulled at his hair. Quickly, bring me a new soul-sealing jar. Shi Lian charged straight inside. Within that black pagoda, The walls were covered in latticed sandalwood panels of varying sizes and shapes, stacked unevenly atop each other. Within each panel were various clay jars, porcelain vases, jaded boxes, and so on. Each of those containers had originally been secure, the red stoppers stuffed firmly in place, the mouths sealed with yellow talismans inscribed with vermilion spells. But now, many were shattered. Oh, many more continued to drop off the shelves by themselves, and those not yet fallen were wobbling. Each of those soul-sealing containers had a demon or ghost who once caused havoc sealed within. A black pagoda like this existed in the back of every single temple in Mount Taisung, utilizing the mountain's pure saintly chi to keep them subdued. However, something had happened to cause this sudden insurgence, and they had all escaped. It's too late, Hualian shouted. He immediately kicked the doors closed. The steel lock that originally chained up the door had been broken by the resentful spirits, so Hualian unsheathed his sword and used the tip to draw out some characters, then plunged it down. He'd brought over 200 swords with him when he arrived at the mountain, and he'd switched the one he carried on his person almost every day. Each was a peerless, singular, treasured sword. This sword, having been planted in the ground at a slant, did indeed seal the door shut, never to be opened again. Only the sounds of resentful spirits thrashing in rage within the Black Pagoda could be heard. Once they retreated from the Black Pagoda, they looked up, and atop each of the summits, black clouds were erupting from the Black Pagodas behind each temple. That's what I was afraid of, but I didn't say it! All the resentful spirits were rushing to the sky, and like rolling thick smoke, they all flew toward the same place to gather. Oh, good! Good! That's exactly what you want to see. Uh-huh. Yeah. What's over there? Why are they all flying over there? Juan asked. The state preceptor yelled, "Have you lost your brains? That's the palace of Shanlei." The group moved like there was... Sorry, I'm getting too excited. The group moved like there was wind beneath their feet, and in the blink of an eye, they arrived at the Shanlei summit. On top of Mount Taisung, heavy, thick smoke emerged from countless temples across innumerable peaks and rolled over to form an enormous whirlpool above the palace of Shanlei. What's going on in that palace of yours? The evils are all being lured over. What exactly did you put inside? The state preceptor demanded. Oh, right! Hualian was dumbfounded too. Nothing, just what? Hualian suddenly remembered that child. At that same moment, I'm too excited. Zhu Shishang cried, "State Preceptor, this is bad. The Crown Prince Hall is on fire." Sure enough, a corner of the Shanlei Palace was alight, flames bursting toward the sky, reflecting a faint shade of crimson on the black clouds above. At the foot of Mount Taisung, all those in the imperial capital who hadn't yet gone to bed witnessed the scene from afar, but they had no idea what was going on. They excitedly dragged others outside to watch in awe. Wow, the great gods on the immortal mountain are performing magic! What a show! In a flash, the group arrived at the palace of Shanlei. Hualian didn't keep too many servants, and dozens of cultivators from the other summits had hurried over, desperately drawing well water and trying to put out the fires. Hualian didn't see his two attendants, and he rushed straight inside. All the resentful spirits of Mount Taisung had gathered here. The palace of Shanlei was practically pitch black inside, and nothing could be seen. Hualian vaguely saw two figures in the center of the great hall and yelled, "Fengshin, Muqing!" The two were defending a protection array that repelled the invasion of evil spirits, straining as they barely held on. Sure enough, Fengshin's voice rang out. "Your Highness, don't come in. There's something strange with this child. All those things are coming for him. Uh-huh. Yeah. Only then did Hualian notice that behind the two figures was a small black shadow kneeling on the floor with his head in his hands. He cried, "It's not me!" After observing them for a moment, Hualian shouted, "Stop holding on! Release the shield!" Muqing cried back, "We can't release it! If we do, those things will go crazy! Let me find the most—" Hualian cut him off. "No fear! Release it, now!" Muqing gritted his teeth, and he and Fengshin dropped their hands at the same time. Sure enough, with the restraints off, the resentful spirit screeched, ready to go wild. However, in the next second, Shilian reached out lightning fast and choked a particular wisp of black smoke. He didn't even look, just strangled that black smoke with his bare hands, gripping it firmly in his palm. The moment he caught that one resentful spirit, the others in the crazed swarm within the palace of Shanlei grew sluggish. Outside the palace of Shanlei, everyone silently nodded. In a situation where a large swarm of resentful spirits gathered in the same place, they usually followed the lead of the strongest one. Once that one was caught, the spirits would lose direction without their leader. At that moment, Shilian had instantly recognized the strongest one and choked it, leaving it no chance. With only a squeeze, that one resentful spirit disintegrated into nothing in his palm. Immediately after, the 4 state preceptors raised their sleeves and called out, "Come back!" That swarm of resentful spirits, having lost its leader, flew haphazardly around the Shanlei palace like a band of headless flies, until finally they had no choice but to resign themselves to their fate, and reluctantly returned to the seals within the state preceptors' Changqun sleeves. Dozens of other cultivators continued to put out the remaining fires, and only when the heavy smoke had finally dispersed did Shilian clearly see the figures of the other 3. Fengshen and Muqing were half kneeled on the floor, still in shock. Behind them, the child was still holding his head, not uttering a word. The state preceptors entered and spoke after only a glance. "Where did that child come from? Fengshen said all the resentful spirits were going after him? What's going on?" "That's the child who fell from the city wall during the Shanghuan Heavenly Ceremonial Procession." All 4 state preceptors were taken aback. The chief state preceptor demanded, "Why did you bring him here?" Shilian shook his head, not wanting to explain, and instead asked Fengshen, "What did he do to attract all the resentful spirits of the Black Pagodas?" One of Fengshen's arms was still in a sling, and he rose to his feet. "I don't know what he did, but not long after he arrived on the mountain, as soon as he came inside the palace of Shanlei, a bunch of those black things suddenly flew over from the other peaks. They were all barreling this way, swarming around him, gathering more by the minute. We couldn't get out." Shilian looked around at the walls and pillars inside the palace of Shanlei, all burned to a crisp. "What about the fire?" Muqing, whose face was covered in soot, said, "We couldn't leave, so we had to draw an array to defend. Those resentful spirits used the candle flames as kindling and burned the curtains, hoping to force us out of the array. Thank goodness your highness came swiftly and immediately seized their vitals. If it kept burning, we'd have been burned to death along with the array." Hearing his words, Muqing closed his eyes and hung his head. To the side, the 4 state preceptors had already surrounded the child, scrutinizing him closely. "State preceptor, is there anything the matter with that child?" If there was anything wrong, like if he were possessed by evil, Shilian should have been able to recognize it at a glance. In the years he'd studied at the Royal Holy Temple, he had specially trained his sight, and very few things could deceive his eyes. Yet he couldn't see anything off with this child. The state preceptor shook his head, also seeming to observe nothing amiss. He asked the child, "What's your birth date, month, year, and time?" Hong seemed guarded against everyone and tense with hostility, and he only stared at him without speaking. Shilian encouraged gently, "Just tell him. The state preceptor only wants to tell your fortune for your own good." The moment he spoke, Hong obediently told them the time of his birth in a small voice. The state preceptor knitted his brows and started divining with pinched fingers. The people nearby watched him for a bit, then discussed in hushed voices for a bit, and at the sight of his gradually dimming expression, Shilian also grew more and more solemn. While the state preceptor looked like no more than a tender 30-something young man, Shilian knew better than most just how powerful his Shifu was, as the one ruling over the Royal Holy Temple. The chief state preceptor of Shanlei, Mei Nanqing, was famed throughout the land for his divination. Shilian learned the art of the sword and of spells from the deputy state preceptors, but he never learned the art of divination from the chief state preceptor himself. It was because the state preceptor told him it was an art of the streets, and as the noble crown prince, he had no need for such tricks. Hualian himself also had no particular interest, so he never attempted it. However, whenever the state preceptor worked his art, there were never any mistakes. A while later, more and more cold sweat was rolling down the forehead of the state preceptor as he divined, and he mumbled, "No wonder, no wonder. No wonder he ruined the heavenly ceremonial procession. No wonder the spirits of the Black Pagodas grew excited upon sensing him. No wonder the palace of Shanley was burned, too. This is truly..." "Truly what?" Hualian asked. The state preceptor wiped his cold sweat and suddenly backed dozens of meters away. "Your Highness, you've really brought something you shouldn't have up the mountain. That child is toxic. He bears a fate of extinction, the sign of the Star of Solitude," which comes with a footnote. The Star of Solitude. People with this sign in their fortune are said to bring great misfortune to those around them, while they themselves are fine, hence the name. This sign can be nullified with the intervention of a savior. The Star of Solitude and Chapeau-Lang are the two most devastating signs in Chinese divination. Well, now I've got to look up Chapeau-Lang later. Chapeau-Lang. Oh, God. Devastating art. Okay, hang on. We're not there yet. Sorry. Did I do that again? I did. I got so caught up in a fucking footnote that I just turned the page way too early. Where threw me right off. Come on. There we go. He is destined to bring destruction to all save for himself, truly the kind that evil loves most. Whoever touches him will have misfortune befall them, and whoever gets close will lose their life. So that would mean that he would be the reason? No, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not doing this. He's the reason why Hualian has such bad luck. But also, we just went through, in this very volume, the whole thing about Huacheng lending Hualian his own amazing luck. And then I hate her so much. Flames on the side of my face. No. Does she accept fan letters? I would like to write this woman a letter. Does she have a P.O. box in China? Do they have P.O. boxes in China? I need to... Before he even finished, there was a loud scream. Hong-Hong-Er leapt to his feet, rushing the state preceptor to headbutt him. Although his voice was young and tender, his screams were filled with rage, as if his heart were filled to the brim with inexhaustible pain and despair. The sound made the hearts of many of those present squeeze. That young child was covered in injuries, Yet he tore and lashed out like a red-eyed rabid dog, violent and aggressive to the extreme. The deputy state preceptors blocked Hong Hong, and the state preceptor backed away, yelling, "Make him leave the mountain. Hurry, don't touch him. I mean it. That fortune is too toxic. Don't touch him." The deputy state preceptors hurriedly moved aside, and Mu Qing and Feng Shen didn't know whether to act. Seeing that everyone was avoiding him like he was poisonous vermin, the child was shaken and started thrashing even harder, biting and screaming with all his might, I'm not! Suddenly, a pair of arms wrapped around his waist, encircling his small form. A voice came from above his head. "You're not. I know you're not. Don't cry now. I know you're not." The young child pressed his lips closed tightly, grabbing onto the pair of snow-white sleeves around his waist with a desperate grip. He forced himself to hold back for a long time, but in the end he couldn't. A stream of tears suddenly rolled down from that round black eye, and he burst out into sobs. They really chose violence with this one. Shilian embraced him from behind and reiterated with conviction, "It's not you. It's not your fault." Hong Hong whipped around, buried his face in Shilian's chest, and wailed. This wailing contained no words, utterly meaningless, and was nothing like the sound of crying, but was nevertheless hair-raisingly dreadful. Without looking at the source, it would sound like the desperate cries of a full-grown man breaking down, or the struggling of a small beast on the brink of death, with its throat slit open by a knife. As if only by immediate death it could be relieved. Anyone could make such a sound, but it shouldn't be coming from a child of 10 years. Everyone was shaken. A while later, the state preceptor said, "I mean it. It's best if you let go." Feng Shen finally came to his senses and exclaimed, "Your Highness, let go! Be careful of..." But in the end, he didn't have the heart to continue. "It's fine," Shilian said. Zhu Zhishang, however, was quite concerned for his Highness's welfare, and saw that Hong Hong was smearing blood and snot all over Shilian's white robes. So he ran over to pull out the young child, berating him. "Hey kid, stop it!" Yet the harder he pulled, the harder that young child held on to Shilian. He refused to let go no matter what, using both his hands and feet to grip on and screaming in anguish. Several more people came forward to try and tear him away, but that just made him hang on to Shilian like a little monkey. Shilian found it both funny and pitiful. He held Hong Hong with one hand, gently rubbing up and down that tiny emaciated back to comfort him, while raising the other hand. "Never mind. Don't worry. Let him be." Some moments later, sensing that the child in his arms had stopped struggling and quieted down, Shilian asked the people close by in a low whisper, "Was anyone else hurt in the fire at the Palace of Shanlei?" "No," Mu Qing replied. "We were the only ones inside at the time." As the Palace of Shanlei was burned to a crisp, Shilian naturally could no longer stay there. After making sure it was only the building that burned and not any of the people, those who came to help extinguish the fire started to clean up the area, feeling rather distraught from all the charred precious gems and treasures. Shilian wasn't concerned, however. The things he used daily were a little more exquisite than average, but other than that, Shilian didn't really have anything valuable inside the Palace of Shanlei. The most precious items were his collection of over 200 treasured swords, but true gold feared no fire. And since those famous swords were all thoroughly tempered and themselves forged in raging flames, they were all unharmed. Once he dug them out himself, Shilian stored them temporarily at Xixiang Palace that belonged to the state preceptors. As for Hong Hong, he was still firmly holding on to Shilian, and after crying himself to exhaustion, he fell asleep. Shilian had wanted to bring him down to Mount Taisung to find a safe place to settle him, but the state preceptor asked him to make a visit to Xixiang Palace first, so Shi Lian carried the child over with him. Tucking the young child in on the divan and righting the covers, Shi Lian dropped the bedside curtain and backed out of the room with Feng Xin and Mu Qing in tow. State preceptor, is this child's fate really that frightening? The state preceptor pursed his lips. Why don't you divine it for yourself? Consider all that has happened since he appeared. The three fell quiet. The moment that young child appeared, he'd fallen off the city wall before the eyes of millions, cutting the Shanghuan heavenly ceremonial procession short after it only made 3 rounds. When he reappeared, Qirong was venting his anger by dragging him through the streets in that horse carriage, disturbing the public, and it all eventually caused Feng Xin to break his arm, while Shi Lian butted heads with the king and made the queen's tears roll. This time, all the resentful spirits of Mount Taisong broke out of their seals within the Black Pagodas and even burned down the palace of Shanlei. Indeed, his misfortune was endless, following him like a shadow. Is there any way to resolve this? Shi Lian asked. Resolve it? The state preceptor asked. What do you mean? Change his fate? Shi Lian nodded. The state preceptor said, Your Highness, you haven't learned the art of divination from me, so when it comes to these matters, you really don't understand anything. If you did, you wouldn't have asked. Shi Lian was taken aback and sat up straight. Please elaborate. The state preceptor took the teapot on the table and poured a cup. Your Highness, do you still remember the day when you just turned 6, when His Majesty and the Queen bade me to enter the palace to divine your fortune? Do you recall that one question I asked you? Gazing at that steaming cup of tea, Shi Lian thought for a moment. Do you mean the riddle of the 2 people and the cup of water? That year, the state preceptor had asked Shi Lian many questions to help tell his fortune. There were questions with answers and ones without, and with every answer Shi Lian gave, the state preceptor would have with a variety. And with every answer Shi Lian gave, the state preceptor would have with a variety of praises for the boy, making the king and queen beam with smiles. There's probably an incorrect word in there somewhere. Many exchanges from that conversation were later passed around as beautiful tales, but there was one question to which, when Shi Lian answered, the state preceptor gave no commentary. Very few knew the details, not even Feng Xin, never mind Mu Qing. That question was 2 people and a cup of water. The state preceptor spoke. 2 walked the desert, about to die from thirst, and there was only 1 cup of water. The one who drinks lives, and the one who doesn't dies. If you were a god, who would you give that cup of water to? Don't speak yet. I'll ask the other 2 and see how they answer. The latter part was directed to the 2 standing not too far behind. Mu Qing contemplated and responded prudently. May I ask who those 2 people are, what their natures are like, and of their merits? A decision can only be made once all the details are known. Feng Xin, on the other hand, answered, I don't know. Don't ask me. Tell them to decide amongst themselves. Shi Lian snorted and laughed. The state preceptor admonished, What are you laughing about? Do you remember how you answered? Shi Lian schooled his expression and said solemnly, Give them another cup. Hearing this, between Feng Xin and Mu Qing, one turned his face away and the other lowered his head, as though hiding their reactions. Shi Lian looked back and deadpanned his response. Why are you guys laughing? I'm serious. If I were a god, I would definitely give them another cup. The state preceptor gently shook that cup of tea in his hand, and the tea swirled in the cup as if it had a life of its own. He continued, All fortunes in the world, good or bad, are limited. Just like this cup of water, there's only so much. Once you've drunk your fill, there'll be no more left for others. If one receives more, another must receive less. Throughout the ages, all conflicts are born from the fact that there are many in this world, but only 1 cup of water, and there is a good reason to justify giving it to any of them. You want to change fate? It's difficult, but not impossible. But if you change that child's life, someone else's life will also be changed, and more grudges will be created. Once upon a time, you said to just give another cup of water, just like how today you wanted to choose a 3rd path. Your intention is to expand the source. A beautiful thought. But I must tell you, it's basically impossible. Shi Lian listened silently, but disagreed wholeheartedly. Still, he didn't rebut. Thank you, State Preceptor, for your wisdom. The State Preceptor drank the tea, smacked his lips, and said, Don't trouble yourself. Wisdom or not, you don't listen anyway. Having been seen through... Shi Lian softly cleared his throat. State Preceptor, earlier today in the Palace of Divine Might, in a moment of passion, this disciple offended you. Please forgive me for my affront. The State Preceptor shook out his sleeves and smiled. You're my favorite disciple, as well as the Crown Prince. How could I not forgive you? Your Highness, I can tell you that you are the most beloved by the heavens I have ever seen. Shi Lian didn't understand, so he listened closely. The State Preceptor continued, You have the innate talent, the ambition, the heart, and you're not afraid of hard work. You have a prestigious background, but still have a compassionate nature. No one is more worthy of the title Darling of the Heavens. Still, I am worried about you. I'm afraid there will be a trial you won't be able to pass. And that is? Shi Lian asked. Although you've already reached such a height, there are some things that you are still far from understanding, and that others can't teach you. Like that speech you made today at the Palace of Divine Might, that bit about not worshipping gods or something. Very few are able to think that far, and that you managed to arrive at such opinions at such a young age is already impressive. However, do not think yourself to be the only one in the world who has had such thoughts. Shi Lian's eyes widened slightly. The State Preceptor continued, The things you spoke of today have already been said by others, decades or maybe centuries ago, but their words never gained momentum. Their voices were too small, so not many heard. Have you ever wondered why that is? Shi Lian pondered briefly and replied, Because even if they thought of it, they never acted on it and weren't determined enough. What about you? What makes you think you're determined enough? The State Preceptor asked. State Preceptor, do you think I can ascend? Shi Lian asked. The State Preceptor gave him a look and said, If you can't ascend, then no one can. It's only a matter of time. Shi Lian smiled. Then you just watch, sir. He pointed to the sky. If one day I ascend, I will surely do all that I said today and become a power to behold. Feng Shen and Mu Qing, who were standing behind him, both unconsciously held their heads higher after hearing his declaration. Feng Shen's lips curved upward, and the light shining in Mu Qing's eyes was exactly the same as Shi Lian's. The State Preceptor nodded. Very well. I shall wait and see. However, I don't think it's a good thing for you to ascend too early. Let me ask you, what is the path? Shi Lian inclined his head. As you have said, that which is walked is the path. Indeed, the State Preceptor said, but you haven't walked enough, so I think it's time for you to take a walk down the mountain. Shi Lian's face lit up. The State Preceptor continued, You're 17 this year. I will permit you to descend Mount Taisang and gain some experience through travels on the outside. That's excellent, Shi Lian exclaimed. Every day he spent at the imperial capital just thinking about the king, Qirong, and everything else, Shi Lian couldn't help but feel crabby. Plus, now that such a magnificent palace of Shanlei had been torched, he wouldn't be able to avoid another bout with his parents, so why not go farther away and focus wholly on walking his own path? Just then the State Preceptor added, Your Highness, throughout the ages, there's a saying that's been passed down like it's self-evident truth, but it's actually wrong, and no one has ever noticed. What saying? When humans ascend, they become gods. When humans fall, they become ghosts. Shi Lian gave it some thought. Is there something wrong with that? The State Preceptor replied, Of course it's wrong. Remember, when humans ascend, they are still human. When they fall, they are still human. We just graduated from best chapter title to favorite line. That is the line. That is the line of lines. That is it. That is the whole. That is, if there was one major point in this entire series. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. Hang on. 388. Hualian chewed on those words, and the state preceptor patted him on the shoulder and glanced behind. In any case, as for that child, don't take it to heart. Everyone has their fate. Many times there won't be a way to help just because you want to. If anything happens, we'll deal with it then. Go out and experience the world. I pray that when you return, you will have matured. However, that very night, outside of everyone's expectations, that child escaped from the royal holy temple and disappeared. And even further outside of everyone's expectations, after his travels, at the age of 17, Hualian, the crown prince of the kingdom of Shanlei, soundly defeated a nameless ghost at Union Bridge. Just like that, he ascended to the heavens amidst roars of thunder and lightning. It was the sensation of the three realms. That's it. That's it. I didn't look at the clock fucking once. Not a single time. I did not. I didn't keep track of time at all. I was too busy. What? How many? This is the end of volume 2. Volume 2. Aren't there like 7? Or no, 9? Something like that? Yeah? 8? I don't... But that was amazing. That ending. That was amazing. Like, wow. I am kind of speechless, kind of terrified. Like, I'd need time to get that sorted in my brain, because that was a lot. And that really I feel like this really showcased, I think this ending was the first, if I were to guess, I feel like this ending was the first real glimpse of where this story can go. And that's horrifying, because this is like the end of most things. This is where most series or most movies or most books, this is where they end. They build up to this, and then they end, and then that's it. And this is just the end of volume 2 of 8. Alright. High key terrified. Also, just with the one shred of a brain cell I have left, soundly defeated a nameless ghost at Union Bridge? Nameless ghost, you say? I know you, MXTX. I'm suspicious as fuck about that. I really don't have... I'm head empty and head full all at once. That's really all I can think to say. I mean, hell. That was That was really special. Holy shit. Trying to get my brain come back to me. Someone should give me trigger warnings at some point. Here's the thing. 99.9% of the time, I don't need trigger warnings. I think the only time that I ever need to be prepared for something, is probably like, I would probably like to be warned ahead of time if there's like a graphic depiction of like animal abuse. Right? But outside of that, I can take anything on the fly. I don't even name meanings from the glossary. Name meanings from the glossary. I just thought it was a pronunciation help back here. Oh no. Oh. Well, hell. Are there any spoilers in the names? For like later on? Just curious. Because we know that Huacheng is flower and city. And then we just learned that Honganger was red, essentially. Go on what the characters mean and such. Oh, of course. Hualian means thank and wilt, and sympathy and love. Yeah, I'm stunned that that's what his name means. Let me see if there's anything that catches my eye. Aw, mooching means yearning and affection. Well, Shiching Xuan. Tissue. Oh, the Ghost Realm and Ghost Realm Associates. Oh. Interesting. Churong's name is Face of Sorrow or Relative or Tolerate. Slash face. Huh. I wonder what that's about. Xuanqi means declare and concubine. Interesting. Ooh, there's like way more in here. Okay, I just thought it was a pronunciation guide in the back, but there's actually like way more. I'm gonna have to go through that. Definitely. But it is 4:45. And so, oh, damn. Okay. So that was volume 2 of Heaven Official's Blessing. No. For a split second, I thought we had basically got an explanation for the title. Which I guess, in a way, we have. It's just that he's not technically a Heaven Official yet at the time that happened. He hadn't ascended. So he technically wasn't a Heaven Official yet. But you could still, like, I could still see how that would technically, like, work. Maybe, unless there's specifically a blessing he doles out as a heavenly official. I don't know. We have another like 6 volumes. We got time. We got time to figure it out. This was amazing. And this is on a rather this is on track to becoming one of my favorite things ever. It's already a decent amount of the way there. But it's really, I entirely understand, even only having read 2 volumes, I entirely understand like the fervor behind this. And like even only having read 2 volumes, knowing that they have filmed the live action version and it's just sitting on someone's hard drive somewhere in China, it becomes more and more painful to know the more I read this series. And then also season 2 of the Donghua comes out when? At any point in time, maybe, would be nice. I would kill to see so many of these things animated. When? Last time we heard anything was like fucking Halloween. But you know, it's fine. It's fine. It's not. But we're gonna pretend like it is because we don't have any other choice. So aside from that waiting game, Volume 3 picks up in very early April. Actually, let me check real quick because I believe it's literally like, what, the 4th? Yeah. April 4th is when we pick up Volume 3. And after an ending like that, I could not be more excited. Thank you so much for tuning in and coming along. I hope you had a great time. As always, I had a blast. I think that was literally the first time I'd ever read straight through a stream and just not looked at the clock at all. I'm always trying to keep an eye on to make sure that I don't run late. Didn't at all. So that's a first. That's a first for these reading streams. I'll be back in April with Volume 3. Thank you so much for tuning in. It really means a lot. I would not do this any other way, and if I have to because things get explicit at some point, I'm gonna be sad. But we will take that as it comes. I will see you guys in April. But in terms of live streams, stay tuned for the following month because whatever game that I wind up playing, it's going to be really good and it's going to be really gay. So if you would like to come along with me for that, that would be awesome as well. And tomorrow and the day after is the Moonlight Chicken last 2 episodes in the finale. And that's going to break everyone's heart. So that's happening in lives over on Discord. And I believe that's it. Please have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, night, what have you. And please take care of yourself. Please take care of yourself. And I will see you very, very soon. Okay? Bye, guys.